Welcome to the 700 Club, and thanks for joining us. The CDC is under fire again, this time for withholding information from the public about the COVID pandemic. According to a New York Times investigation, the CDC said the information wasn't ready for prime time.
The investigation raises questions about what specific data was withheld and why. It also further erodes the credibility of the CDC and its capacity to keep the American public safe. Medical reporter Lori Johnson brings us the details.
The investigation found the agency responsible for helping Americans weather the COVID pandemic has only provided a small amount of the vast data it's obtained. Areas of this withheld information include COVID hospitalizations, including age, race, and vaccination status, the efficacy of boosters among 18 to 49-year-olds, the group least likely to benefit from the shots, and COVID levels in wastewater systems in various U.S. communities. While the CDC has not yet responded to CBN News, a spokesperson told The Times in part that the information was not ready for prime time. The CDC's Kristen Nordland added the agency must ensure details are accurate and actionable. She also admitted concern the data might be misinterpreted, such as vaccines being ineffective.
This is terrible. I mean, this is bad news.
Political analyst Nathan Gonzalez told CBN News Faith Nation this only adds to Americans' skepticism of government.
Now that we're this far and we're 2 years into a pandemic and we get this story from the New York Times, it just creates even more distrust.
He sees one way the CDC can rebuild that trust, tell Americans the whole truth.
Give out more information, but put it in proper context. Give people the tools to know how to use the information in order to make the best decision for their lives and for their family.
Former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb says the CDC essentially failed its objectives, communication, and guidance.
So we didn't have an organization capable of doing that. We sort of surmised that CDC would be up to that task, but it wasn't.
He says the CDC has a reputation of being slow at processing and sharing data.
We need a better capability to gather and disseminate information in a real-time fashion. CDC really wasn't up to that challenge.
Gottlieb says moving forward, the agency should present all relevant data.
Consumers could look at it and say, okay, this is what I need to do. This is what the agency is telling me based on this evidence.
So while the COVID-19 pandemic presented never-before-seen challenges to America's top health agency, critics say it should learn from its messaging mistakes and pivot before the next health emergency. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
I think one of the top things they need to do is get the politics out of it. Just inform the public on the medical facts, the medical guidance, and leave the politics way behind. It's become remarkably political, where they're looking at their data and saying, is this likely to be misinterpreted, and therefore we're not going to release it? Well, that's not a free and open society. You don't get to judge that. You get to say, here are the facts that we're having from the field. This is what is happening. And then let the truth come out and quit worrying about how it's going to be spun. That's really not your job. Don't play politics with the information. Don't play politics with medical guidance for the public, because all that does is increase the suspicion that you're withholding vital information or you're misguiding people, and that causes everything to shut down. You have to stay first and foremost true to the data. If you do, then everyone will trust what you release and trust what you say. If you don't, then the trust is going to evaporate and you're not going to be able to rebuild it. Well, in other news, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has now started, and so has the first level of sanctions from the Biden administration. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That is right, Gordon. In response to Russia sending troops into parts of eastern Ukraine, President Biden is acting to prevent further escalation, warning of more economic sanctions after initiating the first round aimed at Russia's economy. CBN's Charlene Aaron has a story.
The Biden administration calls Vladimir Putin's move into parts of eastern Ukraine the beginning of an invasion and is responding with harsh sanctions against Russian banks, lawmakers, and businessmen.
He bizarrely asserted that these regions are no longer part of Ukraine and their sovereign territory. To put it simply, Russia just announced that it is carving out a big chunk of Ukraine.
CBN's George Thomas reports those provinces are seeing a heavy uptick in fighting.
Now that Russia has rolled its tanks across parts of Donbas region, attacks against Ukrainian positions have been spiking. Since Monday's invasion, there have been more than 5,000 ceasefire violations, the overwhelming majority of them committed by Russian forces. The Ukrainian military has been holding back, trying not to give Putin the excuse for a full-scale invasion. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky is calling up some 250,000 reservists as new satellite images show Moscow deploying more forces to Belarus and Western Russia.
Russian lawmakers approved Putin's request to use military force outside of Russia. In response, the U.S. is imposing punishing sanctions on Russian banks, business elites, and their families.
We've cut off Russia's government from Western financing. It can no longer raise money from the West.
Senator James Langford on what those sanctions mean for the Kremlin.
Russia has a smaller GDP, gross domestic product, than the state of Texas has. They're basically a gas station that's selling oil and natural gas to Europe and to Asia and whoever wants to be able to buy it. If we cut that off, Russia's economy collapses and Putin faces real consequences.
The European Union also imposing sanctions, with Germany freezing a major new Russian natural gas pipeline known as Nord Stream 2. 800 U.S. troops, along with fighter jets and helicopters, are being repositioned to support NATO members in the Baltic states. The sanctions expected to have an impact here at home. Gas prices are already up 20% over last month. And if Russia's spigot is turned off, those prices could go even higher. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
And the crisis is bringing bipartisanship to the nation's capital. Congressional Democrats and Republicans are working together on legislation to support Ukraine and ratchet up sanctions on Russia. Well, that sense of bipartisanship is a break from an uproar that's gripped Washington in recent days. A tech executive is accused of exploiting access to White House data, looking for damaging information about former President Donald Trump. It's just one of several allegations in a filing by special counsel John Durham. CBN's Tara Mergener has this report on Durham's probe, which dives into the origins of the 2016 FBI investigation into whether Russia colluded with Donald Trump's first presidential campaign.
Some legal observers insist the filing proves what President Trump and many of his supporters maintained all along, specifically that opponents were spying on him and that Hillary Clinton's campaign lied about its involvement.
At issue, Durham's memo pointing out Clinton's campaign paid for computer research to link then-candidate Donald Trump to Russia, mining data from Trump Tower and later the White House, a claim Trump has been repeating for years.
They spied on my campaign.
There's no real evidence of that.
Of course there is.
The 13-page document sparked opposite reactions from the 2016 presidential rivals. Trump calling it the crime of the century, Clinton a fake scandal.
This kind of unauthorized access of a computer system or access that goes beyond authorization that you've been given is a federal crime.
Durham's latest filing stems from the case against former Hillary Clinton campaign attorney Michael Sussman. He is accused of lying to the FBI. According to Durham, Sussman claimed he didn't work for her campaign when he went to the Justice Department pushing a Russia collusion narrative between Trump Tower and a Kremlin-linked bank. Sussman's legal team followed this latest filing with a motion to dismiss Durham's case, calling it prosecutorial overreach. In the filing, Durham suggests Sussman's allies exploited government databases to snoop on the Trump White House, saying cyber researchers had access to this trove of data through a federal government contract.
It's probable or possible that, in essence, a political presidential campaign was using cyber tools to spy on another campaign, and then continue to do that spying once the other candidate became president.
In the rebuttal filing, lawyers insist Durham is wrong, arguing that the data was properly obtained and actually gathered while Barack Obama was in the White House. Sussman's lawyers also claim they found potentially alarming links from Trump to Russia and say it was within the purview of their government contract to look for security threats. Some legal analysts say the document isn't the smoking gun evidence conservatives are touting it to be.
I don't think you can credibly call this, illicit spying. This was, really cybersecurity experts and analysts kind of doing what they were supposed to do, which is look for suspicious patterns.
So far, Durham has not charged anyone with spying on Trump. The filing also did not state that any content from the White House communications was compromised.
It's just sort of striking that whether or not you think they might have done something questionable, Durham himself doesn't seem to have regarded it as criminal.
Republicans are criticizing certain media outlets for not pursuing this story with the same vigor as they did Russia allegations.
If this was the other way, if this was a story about how the Trump campaign had hired some data experts and others to go out there and do this to President Clinton, this would be like we wouldn't be able to talk about anything else around here.
Compare that, critics say, to Russian collusion allegations against President Trump, dominating more than 2,600 minutes of airtime on the major network's evening newscast through the first half of 2019. In Washington, I'm Tara Mergener, CBN News.
Thank you, Tara. Gordon, I know the question many are wondering is whether this report will result in any indictments.
Well, I wish Durham would wrap it up. I mean, this sort of trickling out of information is leading to a lot of spin and spin on both sides. And it's interesting, you now hear Hillary Clinton calling this a fake scandal, as much akin to fake news from 2017, 2018. But the core of all of this is the Steele dossier. And you look at that, and it was a paid-for opposition research document that somehow got credibility in our FBI and in our Department of Justice, led to the appointment of a special prosecutor, led to a whole series of congressional investigation, led to an impeachment, and it looks like all of it was fake. So let's look at that and say, what in the world happened? How could the FBI be so fooled by it that they would take it as a serious investigation that would lock up an administration for 2 years? That was a national nightmare. Let us not forget it, and let us not forget how it began.